this is Unusual Insight.
This is the podcast where we ask you to voyage with us or something down a rabbit hole. We're going to talk about some cool stuff.
My name's Ashleigh.
My name's Jesse.
And today we are talking about subliminal messages. It's been a crazy week. Lots has been happening.
It's been a hell of a freaking week. I've discovered that working overnights is the worst thing to ever happen to my life. That's really rough. And then between doing stuff for the podcast and I just started school back again, I think I brought that up on a recent episode. So yeah, I just started school. So I don't understand. I will say, I do not understand how I used to do so much homework when I was in high school and first in college. And then now I take this break and I'm going back and it's literally I'm taking one class and I'm falling. I'm drowning in work.
Well, I mean, I feel like you're taking one class, but it's different when it's one class for a certification. You know what I mean? It's not like you're just learning English. They're covering so much stuff.
Yeah, but I will say when I was, originally going to college, I was doing my general stuff first, but I still was taking at some points, 5 classes plus a lab. So even though I like how whenever I talk, you just start yawning, you're just shut up. No, but even though, yeah, I mean, I guess it's a different workload because it's a certificate. I still feel like I was still taking 6 classes and that, 6 and classes working. Worth of homework. Yeah. And working. So I just feel like, man, if you're in school right now and you're I should just work for a little bit and then go back. Don't. It is so much harder to get back into that mindset.
Yeah.
That's just something I've noticed. So yeah, I feel like my research for this episode was a little slack. Luckily, Ashleigh's got pages. And, I did, of course, do research. I wanted to know a little bit about subliminal messaging. I can also tell you everything about all the different pulses that are everywhere in your body. And do you want to know about your femur? I can tell you about that. Or how to stay safe as an EMT or a paramedic. I got you.
All very useful information.
So subliminal messaging.
Yeah, so it's definitely something that I have always been aware of. You know what I mean? For my whole life, I'm 31. I feel like it's been a thing that I guess, thought was maybe used more often, or it's just really hard to find current information of it being used as widely as I've always thought that it was.
Yeah, I feel like I was definitely misunderstood on a lot of stuff about subliminal messaging.
Yeah. What I didn't know was that a lot of the interpretations of subliminal messaging are actually wrong. That, subliminal messages are stimuli that lie below our threshold of conscious awareness. Knew that part, and because they fall below that absolute threshold level, we can't perceive them, even if we're looking for them. But what a lot of people confuse is subliminal influence and subconscious influence, and the two concepts are actually very different. So basically, a stimulus can influence us subconsciously without being subliminal. So if we can see it or hear it, even if we don't consciously notice it, it's not subliminal. It's considered a supraliminal.
Yes.
Which was the big difference. And so I think a lot of what I had always called or thought of when I was, thinking about subliminal messages, what that was actually the supraliminal stuff.
Yeah, no, same for me, and I think that goes into when you see commercials and they make the food look so good and they put certain colors in the background because that makes you feel hungry and the certain music and then this and that. That all actually falls under the supraliminal messaging. Right. And there's been a lot of studies on that stuff that's been really cool. I'm going to talk about the one in England where at a grocery store they played German music, and while they did that, more German wine sold. And when they played French music, the French wine sold a lot more. Now, in this example, shoppers are aware of the music playing, and even afterwards we're oh yeah, well, we noticed the music, we just didn't know that it had an effect on us. And that is exactly what supraliminal messages are, if I could say it. And people do think that, there is some positive subliminal messages and some negative subliminal messages. I mean, whether or not you think they actually even work or not, we'll get into all that. But will you tell me what are some of the positives that you could get from subliminal messaging?
Well, they can be used in self-help things. And actually, I think when used in that way, I'm flipping through notes if you can't tell, they are largely positive. I mean, it's not typical that you're going to call something self-help if it's going to lead you down a road of destruction. So, yeah, I guess as far as the whole advertising thing is concerned, I'm kind of like on the fence about that. It makes me feel a little manipulated. But yeah, with the self-help stuff, there's a ton of audio programs, largely, is what I found, that are supposed to help people, lose weight, stop smoking, improve their memory, be better with finances, stuff like that. Again, the do they work thing, research shows that subliminal messages and self-help tapes are effective.
But it could be a placebo effect.
And I saw that. However, a lot of scientific studies have proven that the subconscious mind can be intentionally programmed with positive thoughts and ideas, and then the conscious mind will act with the information it's received, and positive results can be easily obtained. Part of this is because subliminal messaging only works when it's supporting a desire you already have. So, like, subliminal messaging can't make you thirsty if you're not thirsty, but if you are already thirsty, it can point you in the direction of, like, Lipton iced tea or Pepsi or something like that. Yeah, there were studies on Lipton,
that, but I mean, those were a little foggy in themselves. So yeah, I do think that maybe there is a possibility that self-help with the use of subliminal messaging could make a difference, but also I want to read actually through the whole experiments, because what we can find on the experiments is what we can find on the experiments, which are the findings of the experiments. A lot of these experiments are older and blah 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 whatever. But I want to know, did the people know what they were being experienced on? Because I feel like for a placebo effect kind of to happen, wouldn't they have to know that the subliminal messages were going to be somewhere in there? Or was it maybe just they knew that it was self-help, so since they knew it was self-help, it was helping?
Right. And, I don't know. I guess, again, with that whole placebo thing, like, what this is saying is that there already has to be that desire.
Yeah.
And so whether or not, what I was looking at wasn't necessarily experimental. It was more like research where they're just documenting, the response that someone has, but it's more like, yes, like they're signing on for whatever. It wasn't like purely for research. I think it's just that, the two have kind of worked together more or less and weren't exclusive of one another, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I know that the conscious mind can reject an idea because we're largely biased already, whereas the subconscious mind will accept and can accept information that is not audible or visible to the conscious mind, and then basically can go in and kind of manipulate your conscious, because your conscious will then draw from your subconscious. I always tend to kind of think that placebo can be at play with really like anything. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And is the placebo in and of itself not suggestive? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Well, here, let's go into some negative things about it. So some of the things I have down about negatives. Some people believe that subliminal messaging can be mental manipulation, which, I mean, that's kind of exactly what it's going for. But yeah, it can alter our behaviors, so that way we'll buy the certain products like Coke or Lipton iced tea or popcorn. I'm talking about this because there was a study that was done specifically at a movie theater. But it can also, they're saying, maybe change how you would vote for a political party. It can become a social re-engineering in some way without our consent, and even without our knowledge. And a lot of people are saying it's kind of 1984 George Orwell, and during some of the first experiments that came out about subliminal messaging, I think these were in the 50s and the 60s was when they first started doing that. People were really freaking out. They were not having it.
So you mentioned a timeline. So one of the things that I printed out was just kind of this like very brief history of subliminal messaging. And actually, the idea that people can be subliminally influenced is kind of ancient. Like history suggests that in the 5th century BC, Greek thinkers attempted to employ subtle yet persuasive language to sneakily influence people. In the mid-20th century...
People been sneaky since the fucking dawn of time.
I know. In the mid-20th century, the idea famously captured popular attention. But really, it's only recently that science has begun to kind of more fully pursue research and data of the actual effects. But like as early as 1943 is what I found. Subliminal... Can we just like not say subliminal anymore? It's a total tongue twister at this point. I don't know about that. But we're occasionally
BDSM?
Maybe subliminal messages were occasionally embedded in radio, film, and television programs. There's an animated short featuring Daffy Duck in that year, for example, with the words "buy bonds" appearing briefly on screen. Nobody knew whether or not those messages would influence people, but they were kind of like, oh, well, we'll just put them in here and see what happens. Worth a shot.
Can I hit in here real quick?
Yeah, totally.
So, yeah, I want to actually hit a little bit about how it's done, which is something that you're bringing up right now. So when it comes to visually, yes, these things are flashed right in front of our eyes and on a screen, but they are flashed so quickly, it's within a few milliseconds that we, yes, or consciously do not see it, but since we consciously do not see it and consciously cannot try to dissect it, it actually is submerging itself straight into our subconscious. So it's passing our consciousness, just going straight in. So yeah, that's visually how it's done, while auditorially it is played at a frequency that we can't hear. But that makes me confused because I'm like, well, we have to be hearing it somehow. Otherwise, it wouldn't even be hitting our subconscious, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like you're hearing it, but you're not aware that you're hearing it. I read somewhere that it was kind of compared to like you're having, like you and I are having a conversation and we're in a room full of people that are all having conversations and we're not listening to any of those. We're paying attention to one another, but suddenly someone says our name and we turn. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like you're kind of picking it up, but you're not realizing it that you're picking it up.
Well, I guess because in that moment, our brain is telling us, our conscious brain is telling us that it's not important. Our brain is, you need to focus on this right now until you hear your name, which is kind of a trigger for your brain. And I guess I could see similarly how auditorily your brain would be like, oh, we're listening to this thing right now.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter, that frequency.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess there are certain like low frequencies, especially that can be kind of tucked in under that, like the surface audio.
So I heard there was a frequency, or not even a frequency, maybe it's a frequency or a note that if you hit it, it makes people poop. And I just want to know if it's real.
Yeah, it must have been you that told me that.
Hey, if you know about anything about the
poop frequency,
the poop frequency or poop note, email us at unusualinsightpodcast@gmail.com. All right.
So moving along our timeline, this next one I know is something that you had mentioned researching, which is in 1957, James Vickery, yes. A market researcher claimed that by flashing the words "eat popcorn" and "drink Coca-Cola" during a movie for a fraction of a second, he significantly increased the sale of these snacks.
Yeah, I mean, when you say significantly, you're like, okay, the sales went up. No, popcorn sales jumped by 57.5%. While Coca-Cola sales jumped by 18.1%, which I found crazy. I actually thought they would have been a little bit closer, honestly. But that's a significant jump. And I do believe that was the first real big experiment that came out about this that really got the public starting to get nervous. Once they found out that those things could be used. Then after James Vickery did his experiment, there was a man by the name of Vance Packards. He made a book called The Hidden Persuaders and claimed that advertisers were manipulating Americans unconsciously. Now, this is shortly after Vickery's study himself, at this point, people start losing their shit. It got to the point where it was so bad, Congress actually hold a hearing to try to pass legislation to kind of end this. I mean, they really couldn't, though, because it was so difficult for them, because they're like, how do we pass legislation to end this when we can't see it or know it or know when it's happening? So it actually never even ended up passing, but...
yeah, some people believe that it directly violates your First Amendment rights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, I don't know, I feel like Congress could still have passed something on it. I call BS on Congress for not passing something.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff that we don't see or hear all the time, but there's still a law that you shouldn't fucking do it,
True that.
So, I don't know. Let's talk about what happened 5 years later.
Okay.
Like I said, people are freaking out. Congress is even freaking out, trying to pass legislation on this. These books are coming out about how this subliminal messaging is being used against us. And in 1962, after 5 years of Vickery's initial experiment, he comes out saying it was fake. Not only was it fake, the experiment never even happened, is what I found. He didn't just conduct an experiment and make fake results. He didn't conduct the experiment at all.
No, he just completely falsified information.
Why? Why would you do that? For the notoriety? I mean, if you're doing it for the notoriety, I don't think after 5 years you're going to sit there and be like, oh yeah, it was fake. I just don't understand that at all. No, even though he came out saying it was fake, it's just kind of like the damage was done.
Yeah.
That did not get across to the people. They were already in reaction mode. And even after he said that was fake, other people were coming out with more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
More stuff to scare people.
Yeah. And basically, between, like the 60s after that, up through the 80s, scientific studies were basically discrediting the claims that subliminal messages could subtly influence behavior. I don't know if that was just kind of a response because of that uprisal against them.
Well, I know. I think I think it became a hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, people want to double check research and do things. And I think it became things that are a topic that scientists did a lot and did often. So, they were just finding out that none of this was credible and none of it was sticking. And although they were finding that, even in 1974, still, and this is after 10 years of it continually being discredited, there was a public notice that went through on subliminal messaging. I don't know if it's through Congress or, from the government, that said that subliminal messaging is contrary to the public interest and that using it would not be protected under the First Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's in 1974 after 10 years.
Yeah.
So, it's getting discredited, but it's still fearful.
Yeah, and I think, wasn't it in that period that there was that Judas Priest concert? Did you read about that?
Yeah, I did.
Well, I read about it like 4 different times, but I don't think I actually took notes on it.
Okay, well, I mean, that goes into subliminal messaging in music and movies, which has been a big topic even past advertising. So, there's a lot of accusation, not just against Judas Priest, that heavy metal bands, have subliminal messaging for Satanism and do drugs and kill yourself and blah, 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 which I'm like, hey, if you listen to a lot of the songs, those are not subliminal messages. They're just like straight up
direct messages.
And then sometimes it's not there at all, and people are like, oh, subliminal Satan worshippers. And I'm like, hey, listen, just because they wear dark eyeliner doesn't mean they're sacrificing goats to the Lord Satan. You know what I mean? But Judas Priest was actually found in a lawsuit after 2 young men tried to commit suicide with a shotgun after listening to the songs.
One successfully.
One did successfully, yes. The judge on that case did decide there was insufficient scientific evidence, and Judas Priest, they were quoted saying something like, hey, that wasn't our fault, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, that happened, but also there's a lot of talk about subliminal messaging in movies, and I don't know if anybody else has watched all of these little clips on YouTube and stuff. I know I have, about all the Disney movies with their subliminal messaging that is supposedly in there that has to do a lot with sex and this and that. Do you have anything written on that?
No, I didn't write much on that. I have more of the like history timeline, but if you want to touch on the music and movies,
I would love to touch on the Disney, because before doing this subliminal message research, that is something that I've always been kind of interested in, wondering if, like, wow, is that really in there?
It is. I was surprised how many different examples there were that I found.
So when it comes to Disney, there is a lot of weird coincidences or things in there, some of which are misunderstood. And if you've never seen any of this, I'm telling you, go on YouTube and look up like Disney subliminal messages, blah blah blah. They say that there's a lot of sexual innuendos and phallic shaped objects, and that there's even phallic shaped objects, and like
I read that a lot of subliminal messaging in music, movies, advertisements in general are often sexually related, just because, as we have all heard forever, sex sells. And there's a few examples that I did write down for advertisements that have those, but you can keep talking about your Disney.
Okay, well, in The Lion King, there's a scene where Simba hits the dust and it stirs up into stars, and supposedly the stars spell out sex. So I
watched that video, yeah.
It looks like it, right?
It does, totally.
But what I actually found out, what sex really reads is SFX, which was a nod to the film's special effects team at the time.
Oh.
Yeah, so it read SFX, not sex. At least that's what they're saying. But there are some Disney movies, like the one with the mice. I didn't even look this up. I just know this off the top of my head, where there's a scene where the mice are on this, train track, and they're going down. And if you pause it at a point, they're passing a whole bunch of houses on like this train track, and if you pause it, in the background there is a naked woman in one of the houses, like straight up, just like titties out, naked woman in the house in this Disney movie. And I'm just like, who had the balls to put that there? Like I wonder, someone had to get fired for that. There's somebody high back in like the 80s and the 90s being like, dude, I'm gonna put this naked chick back here, man. That's and so yeah, I mean, that's what I got on it. Of course, I've seen some other weird stuff, like this really old Mickey Mouse cartoon where Mickey's working on a factory line and he's making Swiss cheese. But if you actually watch it, like, he's taking this cheese that has no holes in it, holding it in front of his crotch and doing like a back and forth, and then the cheese has holes in it and he's putting it back down. I swear to God, look it up. It's an old black and white Mickey cartoon. I am joking you not, that is exactly what's happening.
That's a little disgusting.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. But you said you had some examples on subliminal messaging in
well, that involve sexual cues specifically. So one that I saw was like a bag of Skittles, and it like had like flavor explosion written on it. And you know how Skittles, each one has like the tiny little S printed on it.
Yeah, of course.
So, the packaging is like Skittles kind of randomly all over the bag itself, and then the words flavor explosion. So there's one of those like little Skittles with the S on it right by the word explosion, so it looks like sexplosion basically. And then there's like these Pepsi cans, that are in one of their ads, that, it looks like the design of the can just is kind of like whatever background, kind of some neon colored lines and stuff.
I've seen the Pepsi one.
Did you see that one?
They line up to say sex.
Yeah, but yeah, if you can kind of like trace the words or the letters SE on like one of the cans and then an X on the other one, because it's, some picture advertisement thing.
Yeah. I actually didn't see that this time, but like I said, I used to look at this stuff all the time, so I remember that.
Yeah. Yes. And those were like the only two sex specific ones that I had written down. But I just think it is interesting that I guess maybe, like they would just want you to like relate that product with sex, because as we were already saying, like subliminal messaging only works when you already have a desire for something. And so maybe they're trying to, make that correlation between their product and, like who's not desiring sex most of the time.
Yeah, well,
what I mean?
At the end of the day, humans are sexual beings that somewhere in the fiber of us, we want to have sex because we're taught or learned over the course of time that we need to spread our seed.
Yeah. Procreate.
Yeah, exactly. So my question, did you have some more advertisement stuff? Because I would love
Well,
to hear
I
it.
mean, I do, but I was gonna continue on with just kind of some of the history,
Yeah,
so we
please
don't
do.
get too far off that timeline. So then during, so like I said, 60s, 70s, 80s were largely discrediting
Mm-hmm.
some of the, like, I guess, fear around it all in the 50s, right? 90s is when they really start to be able to uncover some of the subtle effects.
Now, do you think that they were trying so hard to discredit it at the time because people were freaking out and didn't want it to be true? And then after that kind of died down a little bit, that maybe in the 90s people were coming at this with a less of a bias?
That's sort of what I'm thinking. Like I
Okay.
said, I mean, it seemed like it was just sort of an all hands on deck, let's calm these people down, because people were really, like, freaking out about it.
They were
like,
freaking.
super freaking. Like, bad for the economy freaking, because they're like,
Well,
what
they
am I
didn't have
being
any-
told?
They didn't have any trust in any of the
Right.
places that they were buying from.
Right. I also think that the ability to accurately assess the effects, of course, with time and with technology advancing, is going to be done better.
Yeah.
So there was one study from 1992 where participants viewed images of a person engaged in normal daily activity. And after each image, researchers quickly flashed a photograph. Half of the viewers saw positive, uplifting content, and half saw negative content. And those who saw negative messages reported thinking of the photographed person in a more damaging light. So kind of immediately making that negative connotation with the person that they were looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, again, these are flashed for milliseconds, like you mentioned. So it's not like they're seeing a person and then seeing a pile of dog poo or something. You know what I mean? And,
Yeah.
and aware of that, they're, it's just that quick flash that your eye wouldn't be able to actually.
And I think if they were aware
catch.
of it, that maybe there wouldn't be that negative connotation too, because
Right.
if they were like, "Wow, why are they showing me dog poop? This
Right.
has nothing to do with that person."
Well, because
you know?
again, your conscious blocks out so much stuff just
Yeah.
based on its own biases, preferences, learned things from the past. You know what I mean? Like, it's already drawn a lot of conclusions. So, a lot of times, like, our conscious sees a happy person, and that triggers a number of things within us. And yeah, if we were to then see a pile of poo, we wouldn't be like, that person's a pile of poo. Like, draw that immediate line.
Yeah.
So then, moving on to the early 2000s, research continued to show that subliminal messages do influence our perceptions, and the effect was still more subtle than they had thought back in, like, the 50s when everybody was freaking.
Yeah.
And then 2006 is when subliminal messaging was really being shown to work in advertising after all, especially in certain situations like I had mentioned earlier about, you have to already be thirsty, but if you're, flashed an image of a brand name drink, and the experiment that we were talking about, it was the Lipton iced tea, people were more likely to choose that brand to quench their thirst. But basically, the takeaway there is that, subliminal messages can't control your behavior. Like, I think, yeah, obviously you had mentioned manipulation. There is manipulation there, but you have to already have that desire or that need, and then the subliminal messaging is kind of guiding your choice that you're making. But that's still fucked up. Like, that freaks me out a lot.
But I will say something I came up about my research is that, yeah, it has recently there has been positive effects from these studies. I mean, not positive effects, but positive that, yes, subliminal messaging has effects.
Mm-hmm.
But I also found that these are in laboratory settings and they're not out in everyday settings. So how people react to things in a laboratory is going to be really different from how people react to things at home or, whatnot.
Yeah.
Like, it would be one thing if these studies were done, in the comfort of their home or in their town, but people are already reacting differently by going to a college to do a study. They know they're being in a study that almost compromises the study.
Right.
At least that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, so apparently, and again, this was 2006, mind you, so 13 years ago.
That's so crazy.
I know, right? I'm like, I graduated in 2005, so it's just weird.
2011.
Oh, you're a baby. There was one, they described it as being a provocative study that showed embedding images related to thirst and not brand specific messaging in an episode of The Simpsons actually made people thirstier.
Yes, I saw that. I came across that.
So yeah, I mean, like, I don't know if, again, there still had to be that desire for a certain behavior.
It was brand specific, that Simpson thing.
Was it?
Yeah, what I have written down, in 2002, a Princeton study was done. Participants' thirst levels increased by 27% after they'd experienced the subliminal message, which was 12 images of a Coca-Cola can and 12 frames of the word thirsty. So yeah, I mean, they were separate frames. They weren't in the same, but there was both a Coca-Cola and a thirsty.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize there was the brand specificity. But yeah, I did read that it just basically exponentially increased that thirst desire. So that kind of went against the other one that was just showing like, oh, well, if you're already thirsty and you're already, suggesting to yourself, like your subconscious is like, hey, you need water. Hey, you need something to drink. And then it gets this, it's like, oh, no, actually you want Lipton iced tea. You know what I mean? Like,
or this like sugary Coke because our body needs sugar, right? But we're, not really needing that much sugar.
So then the next year in 2007 is when they realized that subliminal messages could also enhance academic performance. There was a study done that researchers were flashing students hidden words. It sounds weird to say researchers were flashing students. Sorry.
Check this out, kids.
Trench coat open. It's bad. Anyway, so hidden words were being flashed to students that were related or unrelated to intelligence, such as like the word talent, which would be related, or the word grass, which is random and means nothing. And before a practice exam, and then those who saw the intelligence words performed much better on a midterm, one up to 4 days later. So that was one of the first instances where you're seeing that delayed effect, because what I haven't really gone into is that they haven't really been able to gauge the longevity of that suggestion. Like, it's more like, like within 10 minutes you might want a Coke. Like, you're leaving the movie theater and on your way out you're getting whatever from the concession stand kind of thing. Or in the middle of the movie you're like, I'm really craving some, Sour Patch Kids or whatever.
You know what they should do is that they should take the answers to the questions and subliminal message that, and just that instead of just being like talented or you're great, so like just be like number 57 is B.
Yeah, no. So I did see, and I don't know if I took many notes on it, but I did think it was interesting that there were cases in some more recent studies where they would show, like, not like specifically like, number 53 is 84, but it was like they would flash equations like in a step-by-step, like, 8a times 2b equals this, and like how equals x or something, and how to, like, and each flash would be like the steps of that, and people were then able to solve those problems. Now, whether or not they were someone who was well versed in algebra beforehand, I don't know, but I did think that was interesting. I mean, like, I feel like, just based on my own experience, I would be able to solve that, but a lot of people wouldn't.
I feel like for that experiment, you'd have to give people an initial test to see where they test in math, and only get people that are in the certain bracket.
And I'm sure it probably was much more broad than what I just explained, and probably much more like prepped than I described it as being. But I just didn't, like I said, really go down that. It was kind of mentioned, and I was like, oh, well, is that something I'm gonna specifically look into and kind of go down that hole, or am I just gonna keep with the stuff that I had? So then that was 2007 was the intelligence testing. 2010 to 2015, imaging studies have shown now that our brain responds to subliminal messages in measurable ways. So that was kind of the first, like, real, actual, like, okay, now we can look at the brain and see what it's doing. and activity levels change in the amygdala, which processes emotions, the insula, which is involved in conscious awareness, and the hippocampus, involved in processing memories, and the visual cortex. So that's a lot.
Well, I mean, I feel like you might think like, oh, that's a lot of places to be affected by this, but the brain is so interconnected. I mean,
yeah, all of those things are going to connect with and interact with and have relationships with all of the other parts. But I think what, like, obviously, like, processing emotions, of course, that makes total sense. Conscious awareness, visual cortex, of course. But I think the part that kind of got to me was that it involved involved processing memories, because I'm like, is it able to kind of go in and not necessarily alter the memory, but alter the feeling you associate with a memory?
I think so. I think it from what we're going over here, I think it definitely could.
Yeah, and that freaks me out because, the conscious is largely based on our past experiences. You know what I mean? If we stub our toe on the bed, then we have, whatever association with that feeling and that bedpost and being annoyed by it or this or that. But I'm like, well, if you show me some picture of something happy and someone stubbing their toe, like, is that going to then recreate that feeling for me? You know what I mean?
I don't know, because seeing something versus learning it through pain are also two very different stimuli, and I think pain and your body wanting to protect itself is a much stronger stimuli than seeing something.
That's probably a bad example.
No, but
it was just like
where
the
you're going.
Random one that kind of came to my head.
I see where you're going, though, and I
looked
like
at
it.
your bed and I looked at my toe. And then, beyond that, I mean, I only had up to kind of 2015, and, I think everything in the last few years is still kind of considered present.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wonder if, Vickery falsifying his study results is what kind of delayed significantly further research or even compromised the integrity of any existing data that we would have had at that time that would have supported the effectiveness of subliminal messaging. So again, kind of going back to like, was it that there was this crazy response to his fake findings? You know what I mean? Like, that then kind of made everybody have to scramble real quick to settle everybody down? Was it just that technology wasn't in a place that could really support accurate research or gauge the effectiveness of subliminal messaging?
I think it's probably both, or all of them combined,
Yeah. So yeah, did you list all of the forms of subliminal messaging? What did you say?
I listed the audio and visual.
Okay, so there's the subvisual, there's the subaudible, then there's also the backmasking, which is the audio message that's recorded backwards, which is what they claimed happened in that Judas Priest concert. So it's with the intention of playing it forward to disguise the reversed message.
Have you heard the reversed message in Staircase to Heaven?
Yeah.
I can sing it by heart. I'm not going to do that right now. But
oh my God, would you please?
Not on the podcast.
Why? It's kind of cool.
We don't want to upset the good Christians.
I mean, I feel like we've probably done that. But
we did that with our first episode.
Yeah. Okay, so this is kind of funny, I thought. People were able to list significantly more uses for a brick when they were subliminally primed with the logo from Apple compared to IBM's logo. And it said it's because the subliminal exposure to Apple's logo temporarily enhanced people's creativity. And I thought that was really bizarre.
But why? Why Apple? Because people, I guess, maybe associate Apple with, like, what's his name? Damn, we suck at this, remembering stuff. Thing. Well, I wonder if they associate it with him and he's super smart and they're like, Apple is a smart product.
Similarly to how I had talked about people being shown individuals and then either like a positive or a negative thing, this was kind of in the opposite of that. People were more favorable of ambiguous symbols after they were subliminally flashed with smiling individuals in between. So like, here's a picture of inanimate thing that wouldn't make you, like a curtain. And then, if there was a flash of a smiling person, like, oh, I like that curtain. Or if there was a flash of, a angry person, I'm like, oh, curtains are a little aggressive. Yeah. And then also, people agreed more with a person after they were subliminally flashed with a picture of him or her.
Oh, I could see how that would affect our political campaigns and such.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so this is something that's a little wordy. So anyways, I'm just going to read this straight as I read it on the thing. So in order to influence decision-making in real-life situations, as you had mentioned, subliminal messages must be stored for long-term after only a few exposures, e.g. after a single confrontation with a subliminal TV advertisement, etc. Furthermore, messages must be stored even if they contain complex relational information that requires semantic integration, such as politician X will lower the taxes. For subliminal manipulation to be effective, and notice how they call it subliminal manipulation here, humans thus have to be able to semantically integrate and rapidly store unconscious pieces of novel information into long-lasting associative memories that can be retrieved if relevant to the context of a later decision. So I think it's weird that they call us humans because that makes it sound like they're not humans for some reason.
I mean,
you know what I mean?
Totally, they're government aliens that live in the core of the earth.
I know, that are controlling everything.
They're controlling us through subliminal messaging. It's obvious.
I know. So yeah, I mean, it really opens up the question of, are we being rewired slowly but surely?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, there's no doubt in my mind about that. But I mean,
well, that's not reassuring.
I mean, look at us as people and compared to, hundreds of years ago, But so my question to you is, do you think subliminal messaging works?
Yes.
I'm going to say I think it works, not in the way that it was originally thought of on how intensely it works and how intensely it affects us. But I do think it does have there's something there behind it. Now, sorry, do you look like you're about to say something?
Well, I'm going to agree and disagree, so if you would like to continue with your point, and then I will follow.
No, my point was done. I was going to go on to something else.
Okay. So, I also don't think, in that I agree with you, that the way subliminal messaging was originally done, that its effectiveness was not nearly as potent as people believed it to be. I think just as we've been able through technological advances to gauge the effectiveness while doing research, we've also become more creative in how content is delivered and what that content is. And because we have familiarized ourselves with, yes, how it's processed in the brain, then that is just yet another tool for them to augment the delivery of the information and use it to their benefit. I don't know who they are, but the alien people that we were just talking about, to manipulate us. And I honestly wasn't like a big, like, oh God, they're going to get me with their subliminal messages person up until this. Like I did, like we talked about in the very beginning, thought like that it was used a lot more. But now that I've done all this research, I'm like, I don't think it's in like maybe advertisements and stuff like that as much, but I think it's huge in politics. And it just like kind of culture, society in general. I don't know.
So going into my second question, do you think it's something that the people should worry about and be afraid of at its current state? Just like how you feel about it.
I've mentioned before, I tend to kind of err on the anxious side of things, right? I am wondering, like my big question, and I don't have an answer, is, okay, so we're in this world where our senses can be overwhelmed very easily, right? Speaking specifically of like screen time, you know what I mean? Video games, TV, social media, whatever. And just, stimuli all around us that we're consciously aware of, right? And then lots of things that are, we're aware of subconsciously that aren't being delivered to us subliminally with any kind of, it's subliminal, but it's not messaging that's being delivered to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering, like, what is the potential impact that subliminal messaging or manipulation could have on our mental health? Like, what are the lasting effects? Because that's what I couldn't really find any real research on. Like, what's our threshold for subliminal messaging? Like, could it just drive us crazy at a certain point? Like, if we're getting so many, like, if this is the direction, right, that advertising or other things are being suggested to us by, if we're getting so many mixed messages all the time, what does our brain do with that? And does it just, like, go into total overload at a certain point?
So you're saying you do think it's something that we should currently be worried about the effects on?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna disagree with you. I think currently, I don't think people have to worry about it so much. I don't think that it is being used to the point where people think it was. I don't think it would have such a negative effect on the brain. I don't think we would overload and over circuit. I think the brain goes through a lot worse in other situations, and the body is very resilient, and the brain is really resilient, and it wants you to survive and thrive and be okay. I do think that it is very possible that people are using subliminal messaging to change what we think. Like I said, I don't think it's in such a large way. I don't think it's something we truly have to fear right now. But as far as the future and, media getting bigger and better and more intense, and now we have VR sets that are hooked up right to our freaking faces, and we can online VR date and meet people and this and that. As technology becomes more a part of our everyday lives, I think there's going to be more to fear about technology, and I think that these subliminal messages, if they're going to be used, will be used in that way, and we will be so wrapped up in our technology that they're subliminal messaging, so we wouldn't realize it was happening anyway, but I think we would lose ourselves just even further into it, and be in a position where we can be affected this way or that way very easily. So that's where I'm going to leave that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess to further clarify, I'm not so worried about it being widely used like today. I just am worried that over the next, say, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, like my lifetime, your lifetime, definitely my children's lifetime, like that it has the potential to be abused to the point where it could. And so I guess I'm inclined to feel threatened by it now so that I can be aware of, I don't know, like just trying to prevent it from getting to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like, well, if we're casual about it now, then before we know it, it's like a Black Mirror episode.
Truth. Black Mirror, we gotta watch the new one.
I know.
Haven't done it yet. What's wrong with us?
Everything and nothing.
All right, well, this was the episode. It does not seem to have turned into a mini episode, but we did it. And so hope you guys liked it. As you know, you can follow us on Facebook, Unusual Insight. You can follow us on Instagram, Unusual Insight. You can email us at unusualinsightpodcast@gmail.com and rate, review, and subscribe. We are on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, Spotify,
Google Play,
and some new one called Castbox. The Castbox. So we're on all those places. If you follow us on Facebook, there's direct links. Next week, we're going to have a special guest on the episode. My best friend coming straight up from Florida at a great time when TSA is back in business. Serenity's going to be coming. Been friends with her for ever. And we're going to be talking next week about what?
Gut feelings.
Gut feelings and what that means and what
Intuition
and how that works. So that's going to be next week. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Never had an episode with 3 people. I'm glad it's gonna be Serenity as that being the first time. All right, well, I think we're good, right?
I think so.
Well, you know what I say. It is a strange, strange world out there.
Don't be usual.
All right, peace out, everybody. 8 time down.
Bye.